I heard 3 gunshots and my uncle was killed.
It's known in these parts as the Batang Kali Massacre. 24 Malaysian villagers shot dead by British soldiers. The UK government calls it an incident, one that's never been properly investigated.
They were not armed. They had nothing in their hands. They were not running away.
The year was 1948, when the British were battling communist fighters during the so-called Malayan emergency. It was a war that coined the phrase hearts and minds, the winning of local loyalties, a strategy still used today in Iraq and Afghanistan. But 60 years on, the British government may be forced to re-examine events. The official British line on Batang Kali is that the men were shot because they were trying to escape. That's refuted by witnesses and even by 4 of the soldiers themselves. In sworn statements released to a British newspaper in 1970, they said they felt they'd killed innocent men in cold blood and that there'd been no reason to kill them. They also said they'd been warned after the incident that they'd be in serious trouble if the truth ever came out in an investigation.
This is a very clear-cut case, in our view, one in which any right-thinking person looking at the facts and the evidence that's already available would say calls for a proper inquiry to establish exactly the reasons why what happened did.
British lawyer John Halford has taken on the case and uncovered secret government documents which suggest 2 previous investigations were at best biased and at worst evidence of a cover-up. One shows the colonial attorney general, who questioned the soldiers right after the incident, thought there was something to be said for public executions as a way of discouraging insurgency. Another from 1970 shows the British High Commission in Malaysia, suggesting villagers could not be trusted, that compensation would bring forward first-hand accounts by the dozen. Although the British government has long said there's not enough evidence for a new investigation, it's now bowing to legal pressure to reconsider. But in a statement to Al Jazeera, the Ministry of Defence said this should not be taken as a sign that an investigation will be ordered and that the reconsideration process will take several weeks. Noah Choi has already waited 60 years.
On the 11th of December 1948, the peace of a Malayan rubber plantation was broken by a patrol of British soldiers searching for enemy bandits. When they left the next morning, 24 men from the village were dead and their homes were in flames. And to this day, the full story has never been told.
後嚟一個英軍呢就攞支槍指住我心口啦。我都唔識得呢叫做咩共產黨嘛係咪？哦，嗰陣時啊，佢攞支槍嚟恐嚇我咯，話你講出嚟，如果唔講出嚟咧，我開槍打死你咁樣講。
睇到證明佢開槍唔掃嘛，佢咪講要槍貫槍嗰啲機關槍，咁掃。
symbol of past glories and a reminder of fine traditions to be honoured and
involved in the operation, but not in the shooting. For them, the truth about the incident and the reputation of their old regiment are closely bound together.
As long as I'm alone with you, romantic as we are, a journey to a star could start before the dawn breaks through. You're right beside my heart, we're just about a kiss apart, and we could make a dream come true.
Murder, panic, pillage, arson. Malaya was engulfed in a life and death struggle. Communist terrorists from their jungle hideouts struck at Malaya's basic industries, intimidated labor, and murdered all those who dared defy.
But the communists now terrorizing Malaya had been trained, armed, and even decorated by the British for their help in getting the Japanese out of Malaya. Now, the communists wanted to get the British out of Malaya. In 1948, it was Britain's richest colony. Thousands of acres of rubber plantation were owned by the British, and their estate managers were obvious targets for the communists. British soldiers were swiftly drawn into a desperate and dirty conflict against a hardened and committed enemy. It was a war of terror and counter-terror, in which even the taking of heads was condoned by British soldiers. Rooting out the enemy, hidden deep in the jungle, became a serious problem for British Army patrols. Even with local guides, it was often impossible to distinguish between enemy bandits and innocent villagers caught in the crossfire. It's still uncertain exactly what happened and why 24 villagers were killed. The army's explanation was that they were terrorists attempting to escape. "20 years later, it was the Americans' turn to fight communist guerrillas in the jungles of Southeast Asia. By the late 60s, the Vietnam War, a longer and more demoralizing conflict than the Malayan emergency, had reached a desperate phase. When a US Army company wiped out a village called My Lai in March 1968, the name became a byword for Western war crime. As if taking Brown's cue, the People newspaper put the Batang Kali shooting on the front page. The story challenged the official army explanation that when the villagers were shot, they were attempting to escape. Over 3 months, Williams' team took statements from as many ex-guardsmen involved in the shooting as they could find. The plan was to go out to Malaysia, get more statements. The following extracts are from sworn statements taken by the police in 1970. The soldiers themselves have refused to appear, but they have confirmed their version of events to Inside Story. The extracts are read by actors.
One of the sergeants gave the order. I shot him to the ground. I remember this because someone said, "What are you trying to do? Shoot me instead of them."
Were they running away?
No, they weren't running away.
I'm sorry, but I have to go along with that. That is true.
The man in command of the Scots Guards in the village was Charles Douglas. We found Mr. Douglas living in Edinburgh, but he refused to discuss what happened that day. He has referred Inside Story to the Ministry of Defence. They too have declined to offer any assistance.
He was a young man, told me not to look at the male detainees. I turned my back towards them, and suddenly there was a terrific burst of gunfire. Women and children screamed. I turned around. There were dead bodies everywhere. The sergeant warned me that if I breathed a word to anyone about the shooting, I would land myself in jail.
On the 9th of July 1970, in answer to a parliamentary question about why the inquiry had been closed, the new government's Attorney General, Sir Peter Rawlinson, said there was no reasonable likelihood of obtaining sufficient evidence to warrant criminal proceedings. He was sure that Parliament and the country would accept that a full investigation had been carried out.
個紅毛兵嗰晚夜4點幾鐘5點鐘就嚟，我就拎隻煲罌上去攞到米落嚟煲飯。咦？點解翻轉頭紅毛兵來到面前嘅？咁就三媽叫我哋出嚟咯，叫我哋出嚟問話。嗰陣時問話，三媽出到去。咁耐我哋喺度住都冇事情嘅，都好平靜嘅，個幾十年樹，個幾十年樹都冇咩，我做工人我哋都冇辦事，我做工人嘛，我哋都冇辦事噶嘛。嗰朝早6點鐘佢攞呢車裝人家上嚟個樹嘅，阿兵就三媽打閒咯，三媽落車咯，咁咪就收尾落車，落車嗰啲兵就叫嗰啲細佬哥大人女人上攞呢，嗰同攞呢佢就擰轉頭啦，擰轉頭出街場啦。咁就叫啲細佬哥三媽爬上攞呢去，我同大丁車好高嘅喎，我爬上攞呢去，爬上攞呢趕你啲人上攞呢咯，9點鐘收尾就開槍掃咯，嗰度就響槍，呢度響槍。
For the relatives, this may be the last chance to show anyone where it all happened.
Không kịp phán tuần siêu mà, giờ mới chết con gì đó, không kịp chết con gì đó, mới chết con gì nữa đó. Thì con đồ rồi cho chị mà gì xuống.
They asked him to walk and look straight ahead, and when he reached the stone, they just shot him.
Where? Back of the head or something?
Thì không kịp, hen nó lặng trên đồi lá, ngài con kịp để hết bôi đồng tổ là.
She saw is at the back.
That's a bit you saw there.
大事佢。即係隻片就打啲波牆上啊，全當咪用清緊啲突破。
After they kill everybody, then all the men, then they shot into the air, and after they shot into the air, they burn the places, all the quarters.
我哋錢富人多厲害，知識靚拉做乜做人睇集，私集做我啲齒量一散夫散馬板出嚟手多嘥，識我哋識，作我哋作，出啲橋都我哋橋我超過見他上少，我真講到人惡咁講，如果講住啲啦
我起死喊，佢講唔好喊啊，喊咩啊？咁我唔係拉你哋去，咁我唔係拉我哋，我依家你掟我出嚟做咩啊？我講我依家喺呢度都唔知幾優秀咯，你仲唔明我有睇見嗰三巴佬冇？我講冇喎，我都唔識嗰啲三巴佬點樣啊！你起死谷我講，我講你殺死我都講唔到出啦，我冇見過嗰啲人，我點樣睇得到係冇？你起死喊。 叫嗰隻暗皮阿嫂你唔好喊，我講唔喊啊，我講啊，我睇到成日問我有3巴佬喺度，我講冇啊，我話冇，佢講人哋講你去呢度好多3巴佬，我都冇睇見係喎，我冇睇見我點樣講啊？我去過樹翻嚟。
一堆女人還女人同鬥記一堆一個房啦，即係韞住一個房啦，男人一個房啦，韞到夜晚頭咧嗰陣時，我哋又餓又驚喎，唔知會有咩事啦咁樣。嗰陣時好驚，而家又覺得好撞火。嗰陣時好驚。
點樣覺得你會撞火？咩理由會撞火？
因為佢人死得咁慘啊，所以咪覺得好撞火咯。又認為嗰啲兵冇咩合理嘛，咁樣打死啲人嘛，所以覺得好撞火咯，就係呢一度咯。
He wants to know, you might shoot if people were running away. Under what other circumstances you will shoot?
Circumstances?
You don't shoot people down in court.
No, not in England. In England, no.
Not in England, but here.
Oh, here, this was an emergency. This was a war. And totally different, totally different laws in a war.
What laws he wants to know? What laws were you applying?
There were emergency laws at that time.
There was a state of emergency in Malaya from June 1948, which was in existence at this particular time when this thing happened.
而家你走咧，打死係合法嘅，你要根據當時嘅警德法令啦。
He wants to ask that particular act during the estate that day. Everyone knew that under the emergency rule, if you run, then the shooting was legal. It was accepted. But if they didn't run and they were shot, was that legal?
In my opinion, I think they must have run. In my opinion, I just can't understand why they were killed regardless. They must have run away. Something must have happened for them to be killed.
佢哋唔知道發生咩事，但係佢哋照諗啦，係因為呢啲人啊走，所以佢哋殺。
係啦，係如果走佢殺就合法啦。如果佢唔走嚟講，你殺佢係非法冇。
He just want to ask you, if they didn't run, is that illegal? If they didn't run and they shoot them, is that illegal? 係，如果佢哋唔走，佢哋啲人開槍就係唔合法。
唔合法咪將佢形成咗一個屠殺咯。唔合法就形成咗一個屠殺嘅，你知冇
If that is an illegal act, that means that is a massacre.
A survivor of the shooting, Chong Fong, gave his account of the slaughter.
排隊嗰陣嗱就驚我就仲有咩得你講話咩？係冇？嗱佢心點點樣？你死啊生啊真係啊，係冇？驚啊啊又狂啊！
咁樣你哋行嘅嗰時又走冇？冇走，就行。
乜都冇走。佢一兵就後邊咯，咁就開槍嚟打咯，打到我知唔知道咩鬼嘅，神推佢拱我跌落去，佢暈咗跌落去都唔知道，啊！所以暈咗嗰啲兵走咗呢，嗰啲兵去開啦，唔知去邊度唔知道噶啦。我走先去望佢，哎呀，佢跌到都唔知死，唔知有死冇死嗰人啦，我就走咯。
你冇睇佢哋有死冇？
睇有，我睇到話死嗰啦，我就睇到而家打咗4隻嗰度嘅，係嘛？分到嗰度嘅，我就走咯，驚咯。
Wong Ying, now blind, saw how the soldiers interrogated her neighbours.
嗰啲公司人，男人都話男人，女人話女人。嗰個陳來咧，佢又拉佢落去房嗰度，響三口火打向個房打。我就講佢咁樣個啲手段好毒辣，冇問冇查冇問，就係咁殘殺，好殘忍。你而家我就想唔好挑戰就好啦，但係挑戰呢，幾時都係慘過人民都係冤枉。先生，我講説話有冇得罪呢？你自己要想一想。